I've reviewed and compared the 3 best budget gaming phones of 2024, and to my surprise, the oldest chip came out on top here, and honestly, I still can't believe it. So today we're going to see if we put a cooling fan here, take temperature out of the equation, we'll see if the POCO F6 here can best the Infinix GT20 Pro. Let's get started. Selamat pagi! Good morning everyone, Kenneth here and welcome to my cooling fan gaming test review. This time we're comparing the Dimensity 8200 Ultimate to the Snapdragon 8s Gen 3, and I'll be using the super nice Flydigi B7X cooler fan, which was kindly sent by Flydigi Indonesia, and it comes with this cool white metal plate which I got on my POCO F6. Though for the Infinix, we will be using their magnetic cooling case kit now. All links down in the description below if you want to check it out. Now, I know, some of you may head down to the comments straight away and say that this is not an apples to apples comparison because of the case here, because it's an extra vapor chamber. But as you'll see later, both phones are equally cooled here. And these phones has very good vapor chamber heatsink inside that transfers heat from the chip around the camera down to the center where the fan is attached. Furthermore, I'll only be testing wuthering waves in this test because I found it to be the most challenging, which hopefully could be much better now. But as always, everything said is my own honest opinion, and it would really help me support the channel if you buy things through the affiliate link in the description. So thank you very much, and let's get started with the Infinix run first. First of all, just like my gaming test before, we're doing the test in around 25 degrees air-conditioned room, and the phone is very cool at 30 degrees all around. I'll unplug the charger right before testing to make sure that we're starting from a full 100% battery, and as always, the phone's gaming plugin is set to performance mode, and for the game itself, we're using advanced preset. The only thing I change is 60 FPS to see if we can actually reach that. We're going to compare in a few different location and gaming scenarios here. Firstly is tacit field farming, which I didn't do on the previous gaming test because it's basically fighting and more fighting. But the few enemy waves we're trying to tackle here does push the phone quite a bit, so we're seeing a frequent dip to the 22 to 25 FPS range. Although for most of the time we can see it hover around 30 FPS, and at one point jump to 38-42 FPS, although very rarely when there's not much going on screen, so we're gonna take that out of the equation. Since we have time in this video, I'll try to put a bit more of the footage, and I finally recorded in 60 FPS, so you can really see the frame rate dips as they happen, and what you see here will be what you'll get while gaming on daily basis. Alright, moving on to farming level up materials now. Finally, we're seeing performance that makes, more common sense because we are in a predefined space where the chip doesn't have to think about the map too much, only the enemies, and here we see throughout the fight, it's a very solid above 40 FPS experience. Average is around 47, but you can see some dips here and there to the low 40s, but that's great numbers overall compared to my previous test without the cooler fan, where the game runs at 20-30 FPS throughout the whole fight. Breaking down a short run to the Jue weekly boss portal, the game runs at a solid 47 FPS, which seems to be its maximum capability here. And at this midpoint, we are at 35 degrees top and 30 degrees bottom. That's incredible numbers, which basically means the cooler fan does a great job in controlling the temperature. Now, moving on to fighting the dragon itself, I think it's pretty good. I mean, it wasn't too bad without the cooler fan, performing at the low 40s, mostly with some dips to the low 30s. But then this time around, the game simply runs smooth at 47 FPS. Only 2 occasions where I can see it touches 40 and 36 FPS, but then the latter is especially a cool position where I use Jinshi's ultimate when the enemy's dragon lying down paralyzed. Honestly, during the gameplay, I can't tell if the frame rate dropped though. Moving on to the next scenario. This is probably the most taxing part of all, which is the world exploration in Sea of Flames. It wasn't too bad when I dropped down from the spawn point. Again, it seems to max out at 47 FPS, but the best thing of all is when I engaged the enemy with summoning the echo right away, it didn't drop like crazy, performing around 40 FPS at the start and ends with around 30 FPS. Just going around fighting more enemies, we can see how we are exploring at around 40 FPS, then drops to 30 FPS during fights. And at the last part, we start to see quite a few moments where it dropped down to 23 FPS. most likely because there was quite a lot of bushes around. Now moving on to the crownless boss fight, we can see that as we go outside the cave and load the map down below, we're seeing an FPS drop from 47 down to the 40s and then quickly goes back up to 47, which is great. But fighting crownless itself, it was quite similar to the performance we saw before, which is mostly right under 40 FPS with some dips to the 30 FPS range. If I use Jinxi's ultimate or Echo Summon, this is just another test to confirm that the performance we're seeing is consistent. And finally, last but not least, I found an obstacle course right below the boss where we become the freaking bubble fish. Here we see quite an interesting result. We started off around 40 FPS but quickly dropped to around 30 FPS, most likely to load the map and the wild enemies around. It still doesn't feel too laggy in real life, but it is one of the lowest numbers during the whole test aside from Sea of Flames, where you can basically blow bubbles as a puffer fish somehow taxes the chip more. I don't know what else to say. Anyway, we ended the 13 minutes gameplay with 37 degrees top and 30 degrees bottom, and on the battery side, we are at 34 degrees with 6% of battery usage, or about 27.7 per hour of gameplay projected. Now, if you found this video helpful, do hit the thumbs up, and as a sneak peek, I'm currently reviewing the Infinix 040, which I'm using as a teleprompter right now. That is also a total beast. Highly recommend you subscribe for that review, but let's move on to the POCO F6 now and let's see how it compares. So just like the Infinix, we're starting off with a cool 30 degrees phone, testing in a 25 degrees air-conditioned room, and all of the settings are the same as Infinix, with both phones running performance mode, Wild Boost, they call it now here, and advanced 60 FPS on Wuthering Wave setting. Now starting off with tested field farming, we can see from the normal 40 FPS when the enemies start to spawn, and then I start to summon my dragon, the frame rate quickly dropped to 30 FPS and below. Sometimes around 25 to 27, but also could dip as low as 20, like 20 FPS. On average, we're seeing around 30 FPS performance throughout the fight here, which is similar to the Infinix. But then if we focus on the CPU usage, the Snapdragon 8S Gen 3 here is not as stressed at just 40 to 50%, compared to the 65% plus on the Dimensity 8200 Ultimate. Temperatures are also telling the same story, generally performing cooler on the POCO F6. Just a question here is, why doesn't the game push the phone more to churn more FPS? Well, after looking at the next part, which is farming level up materials inside a domain, I have a hunch that the chip just couldn't do it somehow? Because unlike Infinix that is mostly stable at the high 47 FPS, the POCO F6, as you can see by yourself, just getting 40 FPS is a luxury. As we move on to the second part, it dropped to 30 FPS and even touching 20 FPS at the time. But then let's confirm our finding throughout the next parts, where we walk to the weekly boss Jue here. We can see the POCO F6 actually pushes past 50 FPS, but this is just my theory. I think the Infinix approach, where it fixes and caps the FPS at 47 and stays there all the time, is better because it gives you a consistent frame time, whereas with fluctuating FPS, you are more prone to experience jitters. Now at this midpoint, the Infinix heated up to 35 degrees top, right? But the POCO F6 is actually very cool at just below 31 degrees top, and on the bottom is even lower than what we started at just 28 degrees. So we know the chip just isn't going as hard here, but we don't know why. What we do know is the POCO F6 is nowhere nearly as stable, since compared to the solid 47 FPS run on the Infinix, the frame rate here is actually all over the place, sometimes in the 50s, then averages on the 40 FPS in fights, but then dropping even below 30 FPS on heavy effects. You see where this is going? Moving on to Sea of Flames now, which is our open world exploration and farming scenario, the hardest part in our test today. And it started out, well, decently around 40, even 50 FPS when flying down from the spawn point, but then quickly drops to 30 FPS when just walking around. And then engaging in a fight, well, immediately down to the 20s, sometimes dropping to 18, 15, even 10 FPS. And you can really see how laggy it was. Apparently keeping the phone cool didn't really help, since this is similar to my phone only without cooler test. And again, we're seeing the POCO is chilling much more than Infinix, only around 50 degrees compared to 70 degrees on both CPU and GPU temps. But yeah, moving on to the crownless world boss fight now. It looked fine at first, performing around 40 FPS. But then once you start the fight, put out skills and everything, it becomes a huge ouch. We're seeing the same drops to 30 FPS, sometimes 21 FPS, which is a huge difference to the Infinix that does 36 on average with lowest dips only to 30 FPS. I'll let you check out a bit more of the footage here just to really feel the choppiness. And if you go back to the Infinix part, you will see the difference. Finally, let's go to the puffer fish swimming part, which interestingly is very demanding. Like we're seeing around 30 FPS in general with drops to 20 FPS, especially when we jump up and hover with the bubbles. Again, this is worse than what we got with the Infinix, although this time around, the CPU usage looks similar, just the temperature is lower on POCO here. Now we finished the almost 15 minutes test with 32 degrees top and 28 degrees bottom. Then on the battery side, we are at 28.7 degrees Celsius, although it's a bit more tricky on the battery usage part. As you can see right here, after we finished gaming, yes, the battery was still at 95%, but then a few minutes after it dropped to 94%. Only just this footage, I took it a little bit later. Now, this is my limitation when it comes to projecting the battery usage per hour, because we never know if the battery is at 95.1%, which if calculated would be 20% per hour. But then if I calculate with 94%, then the projection will be 24.3%, which is actually more in line with my expectation. Still lower than Infinix at 27%, which is normal. We did see the chip isn't pushed as hard on the POCO, but compared to my previous gaming test, these numbers are more in line with my first review as opposed to the three-way comparison. So I just want to take a second to remind you that this limited metric is only to give you a rough idea of what the phone will behave, which hopefully helps, but if not, I'll just stop presenting it, honestly. Let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, I think the Flydigi B7X cooler here did a great job in cooling down both beasts of a phone here. And it's not even full power because you can actually plug it into a 30-watt USB PD power adapter and have it overclock and cool even stronger. Although we can see that both don't really need them as they never reach 40 degrees anyway. And then finally, but probably the most important aspect is the FPS report throughout the whole gameplay here, where you can see that the Infinix performs more stable. So you can see it's more of a flat line compared to the POCO F6 that looks like mountains and valleys everywhere. I think the data speaks for itself, and honestly, I'm pretty sad because I'm secretly deeply down rooting for the Snapdragon to unleash its inner beast here, which didn't happen. I hope this comparison helps. Again, do check out the links in the description when buying stuff to help me support the channel. And if you want to check out the three-way comparison video, I also tested the POCO X6 Pro there, and I know a lot of you love that phone. So do check it out here. And as for the other one, hopefully YouTube will recommend you my future phone review. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Kenneth, and I'll see you in the next one.